Firstly, I want to say that I'm very glad to be here. This is my first international conference, and I'm a student of Warsaw School of Economics, and today I want to present some reflections about the connections of language and economics. So the first and main question which I want to answer during this presentation is why language matters. Perhaps the Polish part of audience know that person. This is Polish showman Robert Makłowicz. He travels a lot during the world, around the world. He talks a lot about cuisine, history, and he's also a great fan of Austria. And during his programs, I think that we can find what is the most important in the market. It is not only product, but it is also sweet talk, and the real markets are full of conversations. And he shows it the best. Perhaps we all know how it looks like market in formalistic economics. It looks like, for how much is this apple? €5, for example. Okay, but this is not true picture of real market. In the real market, consumer and producer talks a lot about their life, their products, and everything. So now I want to introduce to you some part of linguistics and philosophy of language. So what is language for philosophers of language like John Longshaw Austin? For him, it is a form of action. He showed that language can have three types of utterances. Locution act, which is saying something in meaning of saying. For example, there are people in this room, and in the real market, locution acts are something like parts of agreement. And even companies think about how to use locution acts. In Poland, we've got example of ING Bank, which has a campaign, marketing campaign called Simple, po prostu, which has to decrease number of paper in agreements to make it more clear for the consumers and clients. Also, Austin showed that there are illocution acts. It is saying with a goal of wishes and orders. And this type of utterances is very important, especially in company. Ronald Coase, in his famous essay, Nature of Fear, showed that giving orders is one of the most important part of company. And also, there is perlocution act. It is saying with purpose to influence other people, like persuading. And persuading, for some economists, like Deirdre McCloskey and Arjo Klammer, is really important. In the 90s, it was 25% of US GDP, and according to research from 2013, it was even 30%. And now our contemporary writers, like this on the photo, influence other people to buy their products, to buy their service. And this persuasion is really matters in the real economics, in real market. But we're in Vienna during Austrian Economics Conference. So what did Austrian economists like Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich August von Hayek think about the language. Both of them wrote something about language. So Mises in Human Action showed that using language can be a form of an action, like giving orders, as I said before, but also in nation state and economy, he has a chapter about language, and for him, language is something like nation-defining factor. If we use to read, to speak, and to think in one language, we belong to this nationality. Hayek considered language as a form of spontaneous order. For him, language was created by people, but people didn't want to create it. And a language, like a law or market, works like typical spontaneous order. It has got some abstract rules, but some problems with these abstract rules because they can't be used every time. Also, Hayek showed, like Mises, that language can influence our mind. In the confusion of language in political thought, he showed that there are some words that are causing misunderstanding in politics, that we should think more about how we use language in politics. So for both of them, language can influence our mind, and because of that, language can be also important in economy. So how and when economists can use reflections on language? I can answer with the most popular answer for economists. It depends. When economists want to answer the question how language works, he can use something like a microscale, that is economic analysis of language, how words are created. And in this case, language is a form of market, words can be form of products, and so on. But for me, it is quite boring because it is an example of economic imperialism. Reflections on language can be used also in macro scale. For example, in economic history, and economic sociology, when we study how different words can change during years. And for example, we've got word honest and honesty, which change their meaning during the bourgeois revolution, according to Deidre McCloskey. And also, these reflections on language can be used in comparative economics when we have two countries with two different languages, and maybe in these forms of language, of important words, or how a word can be created, we can find something important about innovations and about mind of these people. Also, language, these reflections on language can be used in analyzing of the role of marketing, because this is the form of persuading. And that's all. If you want to contact me, my email, LinkedIn, and ResearchGate. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Mateusz. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Mateusz, for the presentation. I wanted to ask you for a comment about the negative shift in the language, because Didra, in her magnificent trilogy, pointed to a positive shift in rhetorics that enabled the flourishing of the entrepreneurship, but in recent years, especially in Poland, I believe we share this experience, there's a negative shift in rhetorics in regards to both economic theory and the free entrepreneurship. Could you give us some remarks about that?
Yes, we can, thanks to these reflections, we can find both positive and negative changes in words. And I think even for using these bad words for entrepreneurs and this kind of people, we can look how people think about economy. So, for example, if we use the term landlord, which is often used as negative, we can find that there are many people who perhaps don't know about housing market, and for them it is something like negative.
Any more questions? Then Mateusz, do you have an example of a constructed language in history which didn't emerge out of spontaneous order, but nevertheless
yes, there was
developed successfully?
There was try to create language like Esperanto, but it is not used because language must be spontaneous order, because people have to create it themselves and use it. But I think that creating language is not possible.
Any more questions? Then I have one more, maybe a challenge. So it is often said, to my knowledge, that modern German emerged out of Martin Luther's translation of the Bible into German, and modern Italian from Dante's work. Well, this is not a construction necessarily, right? It's a literature is offered, and then that is taken on and is spread voluntarily. But it still might be quite dependent on one person. And do you think this contradicts with your theory in any way?
I think that it's more like an inspiration and some kind of unification, because language, if you have a nation, should be quite unified. Should be the same for the most people in the country. So I think that this kind of inspiration, which are taken by people, is typical for spontaneous, this type of act.
Any more questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, I was wondering about what has an impact on what. Is the language?
Them can influence both of them, because there are some. For David McCloskey, this example with word honesty and honest caused the bourgeois revolution, because the ideas caused these changes. But I think that some situations in economy can cause change also in language. For example, I think that during economic transition in Poland, many words were created, and I think both of them influence.
Any more questions? Then I have one more. Do you think government committees such as the French language guardians, what kind of role do you think they play, if you had a look at that case?
The role of who?
In making the language flourish or spread. I mean, one could argue that French has gradually lost its role in the world as language of diplomacy and in other areas. But France is quite famous for having such a committee of, I think they're called language guardians. Please correct me.
I think that language guardians should be something like language analysts, researchers, and they should think how language works, and they should look what words, how words change meaning. Not they shouldn't control language, because it's impossible for me.
Well, do you think the government has some sort of conserving role in the language?
We can try to conserve some rules, but people will do what they want, and this is, I think, language anarchism. But I think that people will do what they want, and even in Poland, when I was listening to some linguistics, they were saying that for me it's quite sad that this rule changed, but this is a fact that people want to speak another way.
And in what ways do governments try to control language? Any examples?
So there are some forms in Polish language that people want to make easier language to use, and some language conservatists want to use the beautiful Polish language like in books, but people want to use their way.
Thanks a lot, Mateusz.
Thank you very much.